Well, the irony is that the U.S. foreign policy is now based on mob rule. What's their prescription for Iran? They say, we want mob rule. Forget about elections. We want mobs. We want rioters. The irony is, of course, then that the same television channels were confronted with real vote fraud in the United States in the year 2000, in Florida and other places, in 2004, in Ohio. Vote fraud in favor of Bush. When they were confronted with real vote fraud, they ignored it. They didn't have any time for that, right? They just swept that aside. So they have no credibility, and the Iranian thing is just a big fraud. And Twitter, I guess, is a cultural campaign. And as you're right, the State Department and the CIA obviously run, or at least partially run, Twitter. So don't believe anything you see on Twitter. It's also great when you turn on CNN and they're reporting what's on Twitter. Twitter is a sewer where anybody can float anything they want and have it reported then on CNN.
Well, I mean, it's clear but it's come out. I'm sure you've seen the articles, Webster, just admitting CIA and State Department run Twitter. I mean, it's their tool.
And it doesn't stop there, right? You look at Google, look at some others.
It's amazing. Ma'am, anything else?
I don't have
stay there. Stay there. We're going to come back to you. Webster Tarpley's our guest. We'll talk about false flag terror as well. Waging war on corruption, crashing to the lies and disinformation. Monday through Friday from 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. Central Standard Time. Back on the network, 9 p.m. to 1 a.m. Retransmitted to Genesis. Replayed back-to-back on the internet streams at Infowars.com 24/7. And I come in Sundays, 4 to 6 p.m. Central Standard Time, 5 to 7 Eastern, right here on the GCN Radio Network. I'm going to hold Tarpley a few minutes in the next hour to finish up with false flag terror after we're done with calls, and we're going to let him go. Really appreciate his detailed analysis and breakdown today of where he sees the world and how things are unfolding. Great perspective always. Let's go back to Annie in New York. You had one other question, Annie?
Yeah, and just give me a minute and I'll get off the phone and he can answer. You've got the CIA and the corporate media with Operation Mockingbird. Congress has been bought off by the corporations. The courts are corrupt. Homeland Security has bought off law enforcement. The biggest story of the decade should have been about that FEMA videographer, Kurt Sonnenfeld. And, Webster thinks that we can do it through elections when we know that all these computerized voting machines are rigged. People say when push comes to shove, gee, aren't we there yet?
Well, that's certainly the pessimism of the intelligence, but I think you've got to supplement that with the optimism of the will. I don't say through voting alone, but through a mass movement. In other words, get political and have a program. You've got to know how to end the depression, and slogans will not do it. Free market won't do it. Big government is bad. That won't do it. You've got to know what you want. It's got to be very specific.
Well, I know at least this. I know we can do at least this, and it's simple and it's true. The private bankers, the Federal Reserve, they did this. It's their fault. Their answer is more of the same, expanding what they're doing, audit the Fed, arrest the bankers, prosecute them. The Federal Reserve broke the law with this Bank of America thing. That's like Bush breaking the law with warrantless wiretapping. He tries to get Congress to pass a retroactive. That's what this federal takeover of the Federal Reserve is. This reform is them trying to legalize the crimes they've already committed. Arrest the bastards. Get that drumbeat going. In the Fed, arrest the Fed. And then, with them removed, we can, just having them off our back, will then open a vacuum of, okay, what's the solution? But until you arrest these bastards, I don't see anything happening.
Yeah, and add to that, who should pay for the depression? This is a depression. Who should pay? The bankers say, Obama said, we should pay, we should have Medicare, Medicaid gouged, we should lose our Social Security pensions, we should have the descent into barbarism, old people on welfare should die, what you're seeing in California. Who should pay for the depression?
By the way, you're not just saying that. You're not just saying that. Biden has said that. Daschle wrote a book saying old people don't get brain surgery. Ma'am, I appreciate your call. I mean, you cannot make up how evil these people are. And again, they use the right wing to say no welfare, nothing, all taxing is stealing, and at a certain level it is. But then they use that phony right wing argument to make sure all the tax money instead just goes to offshore banks and we get none of it. I mean, it is just, and the left is saying tax the middle class. They're the enemy when that's the main engine. I mean, everything is engineered to consolidate power. Let's take another call here. Let's talk to Robert in Texas and Robert in California and others. But we have a call from Italy we'll go to next after that. Go ahead, Robert in Texas.
Hi, Mr. Jones, Mr. Tarpley. Pleasure to talk to you all today. I'm going to go through just something real quick here. In regards to what the last lady said, I think that if everybody does just a little bit or just what they can, that'll make a difference. I mean, a bucket of water is not a lot, but 1 million buckets of water is a torrent. And with that being said, I have called before because I do every once in a while I try to get on the radio shows, the mainstream radio shows, and put a little truth on there. And I was able to get into Sean Hannity's show. I was able to get by his screener and talk about how the Bilderberg Conference fixes the oil prices and how Mr. Tucker and Mr. Esselin were able to predict that 2 years before the huge spike last summer.
Yeah, no, I put that in Endgame. What did he say when what's documented in Endgame came out? Did he just say it didn't exist and hung up?
Well, what happened was I called him. I had the video up on my channel. It's Funkmaster 5. I've called here before, and that's 5 spelt out, not the number.
Okay.
He started ranting about conspiracies, and he even mentioned a mothership UFO flying around or something like that, you know. And then he hung up on me promptly before I could mention Endgame because I had plenty more to say, but he cut me off pretty quick.
Well, that's what they do. I mean, Hannity admits they're trying to set up a Bank of the World, New World Order, and he says, oh, we're right, but only because he has to give us lip service. The rest of the time he's there trying to discredit us. Webster, this isn't going to work anymore. There is a world empire being set up, and they can't deny it.
Look, I was at a conference recently. I put a picture of Lewis of Bank of America, Blank Fine of Goldman Sachs, Pandit of Citibank. I said, whoever gets all three gets a copy of my new book, Surviving the Cataclysm. Nobody could name all three. And I suggested, read less about flying saucers and more about your class enemies. Those are the bankers.
Absolutely. They are criminals. We'll be right back.